And now I would like to welcome you again to the APH Access Academy, Planning and Designing Quality Tactile Graphics. And we have a wonderful presenter for you today. Sally, would you introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. My name is Sally Hart, and I am a tactile graphic designer in the Accessible Textbook Department at the American Printing House for the Blind. I am also a certified transcriber and part of the MBA Tactile Graphic Committee. Super excited to be with you today. Now, speaking of today, your webinar session is Planning and Designing Quality Tactile Graphics. And today it is all about tactile graphics. This makes me excited because I love them. Together, we will go over the basics of what makes an effective, readable tactile graphic, as well as the process of designing and planning it. So let's get happy, get productive, and don't forget your notepad. I promise you're gonna learn something. What will you learn exactly? After today, you will be able to explain what a tactile graphic is and what it isn't. You will be able to state clearly what the most important part of making a tactile graphic is and know how to find it. Lastly, you will learn resources available to you. All vital elements in planning and designing quality tactile graphics. What tactile graphics are. The first step of planning something is to know exactly what you're planning for. So question number one of the day is, what is a tactile graphic? According to the Band of Guidelines and Standards, tactile graphics are not mere transcriptions of print illustrations or raised versions of a print graphic. They are the transformed representations of images that are adapted for the sense of touch. So know that tactile graphics are representations, and this is a key word. So are they representations of pictorial information in relief form, of which the concept and content are represented by a set of tactile symbols selected for their ability to be easily read and understood. The phrase tactile symbol refers to a range of material that can be used to support communication, beginning with concrete objects to a more abstract system, such as the tactile graphic. What tactile graphics are not. Tactile graphics are not exact reproductions of the print illustration, nor are they raised line versions of the print graphic. The purpose of a tactile illustration is to communicate an idea or information, not to replicate a raised copy. They do not include symbols of visual components that sighted readers might expect, such as color, embellishment, and artistic additions. Careful consideration must be given when setting out to present a print image in tactile form. A graphic that is easily interpreted visually will not necessarily be tactfully meaningful. Some visual concepts are difficult to translate into equivalent tactile information, and certain visual properties have no counterpart because tactile perception operates in a manner different from visual perception. So, visual perception. You must consider how tactile graphics are read. Visual perception allows sighted readers to instantly recognize the different parts of a print graphic as a cohesive image, what sometimes we call whole to part. Sighted learners process the visual image as a whole, all of it simultaneously, and its scale and its relationship to objects around it. Take this photograph of a fair. Vision sees all of the fair as a whole, then zooms in to the individual rides, and possibly ends up at that polka dotted tent with giant bouncy balls. Now, tactile perception, on the other hand, is part to whole. This means no zooming in to the polka dotted tint and only experiencing what is directly in front of you. This also applies to reading material. Tactile readers must build up a mental image of the different components of a tactile graphic, because only a part of the graphic, what is underneath the fingertips, is all that can be read at a time. Relationship to other objects can be lost entirely, and depth is difficult to interpret. Learning to read tactile graphics is not automatic. It requires exposure, practice, support, and instruction. It is a different skill than reading Braille text. But more on graphicacy and the products that expose, teach, develop tactile reading skills, those will be discussed in a separate webinar presented by Karen Pope. Best educational practices include alternate activities that support the student in acquiring the skills of literacy, numeracy, and graphicacy. It is the responsibility of teachers, not the transcriber or graphic designer, to provide alternative activities. Today, we are focused on the transcription. Your job as the transcriber or graphic designer of a publication, it's your job to find out what the specific diagram is trying to show in print and show the equivalent. You must first know what information is to be gained from the diagram. Failure to fully understand what the diagram is showing could result in accidental omission of crucial information. It could also make it difficult to make necessary modifications or simplifications of the graphic. So a checklist for you. Preserve the original purpose. A tactile graphic should provide equivalent information to the Braille reader, as does the print to the sighted reader. We should represent the information to the reader, not interpret it for them. Identify the contents to be included. Choose proper symbols to represent them. The intent in symbols we will discuss in just a bit. Using the diagram tree and the tactile graphic planning sheet in the planning process also can be helpful. Throughout this presentation, I have been and will be referring to the Guidelines and Standards for Tactile Graphics 2010 and how they apply the guidance they provide. The Guidelines for Standards in Tactile Graphics 2010 is a detailed document from BANA, the Braille Authority of North America. This document includes information on what shapes and lines will work best for most tactile readers, as well as advice on how to set up tactile graphics so they are, 1, easy to navigate, and 2, consistent with other tactile graphics the Braille reader will encounter. The Guidelines for Standards in Tactile Graphics is available for download for free from BANA's website. A supplement to those tactile graphic guidelines gives actual physical examples of graphics made using various production methods. That supplement is available to purchase from APH. This publication is quite extensive, so I'll introduce only a small portion of these sections as we discuss different aspects of the tactile graphic creation. Please know that when I refer to tactile graphic guidelines or simply the guidelines, this is what I'm referring to. And in case you're wondering, and before you ask, BANA has put together a committee of experienced volunteers who are working to update this document in order to incorporate UEB and the latest guidance on UEB with Nemeth. An updated version of the text and supplement may come out in 2021, but know that they are working hard. So let's get to it. A good place to start the decision-making process is in section 1 of the guidelines. It is important to note that the guidelines and standards are an important tool in the creation of tactile graphics, but it does not teach you how to make graphics. This is something that is learned through training and experience. The guidelines instead are a source of best practices, standards, and design principles used in the creation. Unit 1.8 in the guidelines, you will find this decision tree flowchart, and here it is on the screen. Image options. On this next slide, you're going to see your image options. Readability is what you need, and relaying correct information is the requirement. Sometimes the image can be more easily understood as a transcriber's note, a tactile graphic, or a combination of a transcriber's note and a tactile graphic. Graphs should be presented as a tactile graphic rather than presenting the data as a list. Tactile representations provide a clearer comparison of the information, as in a pie chart or a plotted line graph, rather than comparing only numbers. Some concepts are better understood when separate three-dimensional models or manipulatives are used in combination with 2D tactile images. When a graphic is complex and or has many details that cannot be shown in a tactile graphic, a well-written description may provide a better information for the reader. A print graphic may be most useful to the reader when produced as a tactile graphic and a description. Excellent guidelines to assist in writing the descriptions are available from the National Center for Accessible Media. And the VAVF 2020 Spring Summer Newsletter also has a great article covering the subject of picture descriptions. When making a decision, know the difference. Beware of the distinction between repeat of facts in the text and eye candy versus illustration of the object or subject being discussed. The former doesn't provide useful information to the reader and therefore is safe to omit. The latter, however, serves as a graphical illustration on the subject of the topic. The graphic provides more benefit than the text alone, and the two types of information reinforce each other to form a complete presentation. On the screen, the text beside a circle with POQ labels reads. The diagram shows a circle with center O. P and Q are points on the circle. Angle OPQ is 54 degrees. Work out the size of the angle POQ. You must give a reason for your answer. And here is going to be your first question of the day.
So hopefully you have access to the poll question. What type of image is this? First choice, illustration of the object being discussed. Although it is well described in print, the illustration is a reinforcement of the text and may be helpful for the reader to answer the question. It should be included in the transcription. Or B, it is a repeat of the facts in the text and does not offer additional benefit to the reader. It should not be included. We still have choices being selected. As of right now, it's growing quickly. I'll give it 10 more seconds so that you can click an answer. And for the sake of time, I will
Amy,
close it out at 50%.
while you are doing that, I'm just going to let people know that there will be a handout posted. The links, we are trying quickly as possible to drop them in the chat. If you'll be patient, we'll continue to do so, and we will put them in our follow-up email.
So our results are at 81% selected the first option, that it should be included in the transcription, with 19% indicating that it should not be included. Sally?
Well, this should be made into tactile form. It supports the text by adding a visual to make a complete presentation. Now, intent. This is the most important part when making a tactile graphic. Intent. Write that word down. Once you've determined that a print image should be reproduced as a tactile graphic, you will need to plan your design. You will need to determine which details from the print image are important and should be included, and to know that you must decide what the graphic is trying to convey. It is also important to consider the grade level of the graphic's intended audience, as there are different requirements for graphics to be used by the younger readers. When determining the content of a tactile graphic, you must carefully read the text surrounding the graphic, as well as other information, such as end of chapter questions, and when possible, if possible, consult the teacher's guide or course information. Facts and data included in a tactile graphic should be selected based on the purpose of the graphic and what the reader is expected to gain from it. The tactile producer should not change the content or its meaning, and should seek additional help in interpreting the content if the material in the print diagram is not fully understood. Practice time. We are about to enter into a series of slides with the same question attached. Make it into a graphic. Think of the intent and everything else you have heard in this session to make your choice. Image 1, make it into a graphic. The first image consists of 2 leaves with 6 ladybugs on each leaf. The text above the image reads, example, there are 2 leaves. There are 6 ladybugs on each leaf. How many ladybugs are there altogether? Write a multiplication sentence. The text below the image reads, there are 2 equal groups of ladybugs. Each group has 6 ladybugs. Multiplication sentence, 2 times 6 equals 12. So the poll question is for this example.
Should this be made into a tactile graphic? Yes or no? I'll give you a moment to put your selection in. Another 10 seconds, less than that. And I'm going to end polling here at 66%. And I'm going to share out results. Should this be made into a tactile graphic? 45% said yes, 55% said no. Sally?
All right, the next slide has the answer, and it is yes. In this case, you may think that it would not be necessary to produce this image as a tactile graphic, as it is a repeat of the information from the text. Your first question to yourself should be, what's the point of this image? Hopefully you answered that it is an example for the following problems. Without the image, the graphical illustration of the mathematical equation, the example problem is no longer a tactile example. This is a good example of the illustration of text. With the ladybugs omitted, the word-only example does not match the image-only problem sets that followed. So it has been decided that yes, a graphic is needed. Your next step is to determine if the objects or shapes presented in the print need to be retained, exactly reproduced, or can it be replaced with something with simpler images? This is a counting task. Ladybugs on a leaf, frogs on a lily pad, children on a bench, grapes in a bowl. Anything on anything could be used and the math would still work out. Since this is a counting object task, then that is what we should make. followed the tactile graphic guidelines and standards for simplification of counting shapes. Solid filled circles were used for counting, the ladybugs, with a simple solid 2-point line enclosure for the grouping, the leaf. All right, image 2, make it into a graphic. Let's take a look at our second image. Text reads, eliminate, doesn't say that. It says estimate whether each object holds less than, equal to, or more than a liter. Right? Less, more, or equal. Images of a water bottle, a swimming pool, and a bottle with a dropper are listed A through C. A thought bubble to the side of the image reads, what is something you know that holds about 1 liter of water? Here's your question.
Should this be made into a tactile graphic? Yes or no? Wait just a moment, give you an opportunity to answer. Should this be made into a tactile graphic? I'm going to end polling here at 66%. Share results. 23% said yes, it should be, while 77% indicated no, it should not be represented as a tactile graphic. What do you say, Sally?
Well, to the next slide. No. Think about the size of these objects and about the actual objects. Our first example in image 1, the specific shape image used was not important, which is why a simple, easy to read shape was used. For image example number 2, the images, rather the names of the real world objects connected to the line drawings, are what's important. The task is not to estimate the volume of 3 similar sized line drawings, but rather recognize the objects by name and estimate based on the real world size. This ink page simply chose to have an image represent the word. A small swimming pool shaped like a bean is not going to be helpful for the Braille reader. So only provide the word. No tactile graphic is needed. Image 3. Make it into a graphic. Let's look at our third image. We see a living room filled with various pieces of furniture and household objects, like a couch, armchair, coffee table, tricycle. The text reads, preposition of place, true or false. The student must select whether the following statements are true or false based on the information given. Some of the questions are as follows. The radio is on the table. True or false? The telephone is behind the plant. The book is on the table. Poll question. Should this be made into a tactile graphic?
You will access the poll and for yes or no. Should this be made into a tactile graphic? What do you think? Weigh in. For the moment of this particular poll, I'm going to go ahead and end the polling at 60% here for the sake of time and share out results. 68% of our viewers, our attendees today, felt yes, it should be made into a tactile graphic, while 32% said no. Let's find out on the next slide.
No, not all instructional objectives can be achieved as presented to the print readers. Many of these activities do not offer meaningful learning experiences. to the students who read Braille. Many of the symbols used in print to represent objects are not readily recognized and interpreted by the Braille reader. Activities that require the reader to perform the following tasks should not be produced as tactile graphics. That goes for matching pictures to sounds, letters, words, the activities that ask student to circle all the pictures starting with the letter G. If the image utilizes visual discrimination or visual perception, as seen in the Devil's Tuning Fork optical illusion included on this slide page. Draw a shape configuring to identify words, or if the student is asked to read the story presented entirely in pictures, or perform handwriting tasks. Tasks requiring visual discrimination or visual identification are not appropriate for the Braille reader. So now, time to design. A lot of planning goes into a simple design, let alone a complex one. And so far, planning is all that we have covered. Why spend so much time on it? Polly Edmond writes, there is a great deal to consider when putting together the simplest graphic design. If it is not well thought out, no amount of effort in its production will make the design more understandable to the reader. Planning is important, so it's time to design. Let's think tactile. 4 components. 4 components make up every tactile graphic you will ever make. Areas, lines, points, and labels. It is important to use an organized process for determining which areas, lines, points, and labels will be used in the tactile graphic. I highly recommend using the Tactile Graphic Organization Sheet, which can be found in section 3.3 of the guidelines. Or you can write notes to help you plan your graphic. It is much easier to create a graphic if you've worked out the details before you actually begin creating the graphic. So area textures. Here we are. They represent regions of extent, bodies of water or continents on a map, an area to explore. Most times, these textures are at the base. The other 3 components will be added to it, added on top of the texture. So be sure not to use something so overpowering that the other materials get drowned out. Factors to recognition: variations in height, difference in density or textures of patterns, and a line or white space between areas if needed. Linear symbols represent linear information, rivers, routes, or outlines. A line is to follow. Bold solid, dashed, or dotted lines are easier to follow. Use the strongest line for what you want to highlight. Irregular shapes such as the zigzag or dot dash, dot dot dash, double tracks, lines like those, they're more difficult to follow. So although your rick-rack ribbon may seem wavy and more river-like, it's not. It's just harder to follow. Arrows are also linear symbols. So don't use block arrows, since they will not be read as directional. They will be more likely read as a shape. Point symbols represent specific locations, like a city or a point on a graph. A point is to locate. So it needs to be easily found in the middle of a texture. This means the point symbol will most likely need to be at a higher level or have more significant white space in electronic drawing to be located easily. Easier to recognize is the circle, square, and triangle. More difficult to identify is the cross and star. Minimum size, 1/4 of an inch. Scattered plot dots are an exception. And lastly, labels. Labels should be placed in the most appropriate location. On or in an area symbol, next to a symbol with 1/4 to an 1/8 inch away, near the symbol connected by a lead line. Labels may be used to represent an area or a point, and long labels should be substituted with a key. Hierarchy of labeling styles can be found in Unit 5 of the guidelines. In short, it covers when to use full labels, abbreviated keys, capitalization, and best location placement. Braille withdrawing program. If you already draw electronically or are considering it, there are definite perks to it, and adding Braille is one of them. Not having to use a Perkins Braille writer or a slate and stylus is a major time saver. With drawing software programs, you are able to cut and paste from your Braille file created in Braille translation software programs. Now, each production method requires a different font, but don't worry, they are free and available. And typing directly into the drawing program requires ASCII. Complex images. A diagram must be simplified when there are too many specified areas, shaded or colored to represent tactily. Complex diagrams have too many areas, too many lines, and too many points. And it's time for your next question.
So our next poll question. What is the maximum number of area textures one graphic page should contain? 5, 8. The number is not important as long as it's readable. What do you think? The maximum number of area textures one graphic page should contain. I'm going to stop end polling at 55% and share out. 51% of you selected that the number is not important as long as it's readable. Let's find out the answer.
The guidelines state in 3.2.2, in general, a single graphic should contain no more than 5 different area textures, 5 different line styles, and 5 different types of point symbols. If more are needed to represent the information required, consider using an alphabetic key. More than 5 textures make tactile graphic diagrams hard to understand and discourage the reader from exploring the display. When there are too many line styles, more than 5, it leads to confusion, especially if the reader is required to trace direction. Complex is also when there are too many labels required. While very useful for identifying parts, Braille labels can overload the illustration and obscure the shapes of parts of diagrams. Diagrams should simplify concepts, not complicate them. Make it readable. We will touch on these readability adjustments throughout, but here's a bulleted list of design changes that a tactile graphic may go through. Simplification, elimination, consolidation, distortion, separation, change of view, and modification. Clutter. Clutter can occur when different symbols and lines are so close or so similar, they become hard to distinguish. Spacing is the key to avoiding this. Symbols and lines closer than 1/4 of an inch may be hard to tell apart, depending on the medium and the tools being used. Slight distortion of spacing or the shape of the original picture, if necessary to allow uncluttering space of the tactile elements, providing that it would not violate the purpose of the picture, is doable. We do this a lot with maps. We should not do this with mathematical figures. Again, too many, no more than 5 textures, 5 lines, and 5 points. That's already 15 different things. Simplify. Do not include unnecessary elements of the original. Do not include the unnecessary elements of the original picture. Focus on the relevant parts and omit the details that are purely decorative or distracting. Separation. In maps, the main problem is lack of space. The scale we have to work with is so much larger, and Braille always takes up more space than ink print lettering. Split complicated graphics into separate drawings showing layers of information, or into an overview and a detailed view. Explain this separation in a transcriber's note. Be sure to carry over some labels and or common points from one drawing to another for points of reference. This map was chosen to show how print will guide you on how to best logically split a graphic. The key for this map has 2 subheadings that make good separation. One that reads the invasion of Afghanistan, and the other reads the invasion of Iraq. In general, use texture sparingly and only to add information. The orange color used for Iraq doesn't have any informational purpose. Its print purpose is to simply highlight the country. So the orange, purpley pink, and yellow country shadings can be omitted. When necessary to avoid confusion or to give important information, showing a difference between bodies of water and land on maps by using a different aerial symbol texture. This water texture separation is more often needed when drawing electronically than with collage, but use it when needed. And again, it will depend greatly on your production method and the end user. If needing a water texture, use a very low, closely spaced texture for the water. 3D. This stuff can be tricky. A print graphic may be simplified as long as the original intent is not compromised. If the task does not involve measurement, modifications to size, position, or layout may be made into an illustration, may be made to clarify the presentation. If the concept of depth is not required, a 3-dimensional view should be changed to a 2-dimensional view, identifying the views such as front or cross section. When print shows 3-dimensional information, as with perspective, this concept cannot easily be shown in a tactile graphic. However, sometimes the 3D-ness is unavoidable. An example of this is when the volume of a figure is being taught. Time for your next question.
So our next question reads, what view Should the layers of the earth images be changed to? Should it be front, cross section, top, or fine as is? What do you think? Which view of the layers should we view? Going to get up to 50% reporting. And I'm going to stop and share results. 59% of our viewers today selected cross section. 59% said the cross section, with 30% reporting in as front. Let's find out what it should be.
A bit tricky question there. Top and cross section for the globe part is correct, since it would look the same. However, a top view of the segment piece would not be useful, since it would only show the mountains. So cross section is what I would title both of the tactile graphic images for consistency. On this screen is a labeled 2D cross-section view of the Earth's layers. It has been simplified and it contains full Braille labels. What you are seeing is an unaltered image that is a free PDF available to anyone, anywhere. It is one of over 2,000 options. It's from the Tactile Graphic Image Library, the TGIL. This is a free service provided by the American Printing House for the Blind. A separate webinar will cover this great resource and go into depth on how to use it. I've included this image so you will know that you will have to customize every image to meet your needs, but you don't have to start from scratch on many of them. Visit imagelibrary.aph.org and see what's available to you. Practice time. Put your knowledge to the test and let's brainstorm with each other together. The next slide is a print image, and I want your ideas on how to take it and make the information accessible for the tactile reader. So here we go. Comparison of seeds and leaves. Here it is. What you know. This is an image showing dicot and monocot leaves and seeds. A tactile graphic is needed. The image is needed to answer comparison questions. So let's pause for a few minutes to think about planning, designing, and layout. Type your ideas into the chat. Participate. Talk it out.
So we have cross section. I wouldn't want the leaf and seed to overlap. Separate the leaves and seeds into two separate graphics. Seeds on one page, leaves on another. Print all the images separately. Braille labels on everything. Lots of separate the items. Two separate graphics, simplified. I would make 4 different graphics. Question, do you need the leaves? Sally, could you repeat the question one more time for those of what they're supposed to think about?
Absolutely. This is an image and it is needed for comparison. The comparison will be for the seeds and comparison is needed for the leaves. So to answer that question, yes, you need both.
Okay. Dicot and monocot should stay together. I think it would be important to use different textures for each of the parts of the seed. Have 2 images with labels. Front view of the seeds. The labels are few and wouldn't need to be simplified. 4 different graphics with leaves matched seeds with plenty of space between, no overlapping. Question. Does the student need to understand the dicot stays with the branching veins versus the monocot parallel? Another person, omit all items not labeled. Question, cross-section of seeds? I have 2 graphics, dicot and monocot on facing pages for easy comparison. Simplify images of seeds, including labels. I would do multiple graphics to layer understanding. 2 graphics with textures for each label, making sure the same label has the same textures. Seed coat for dicot and seed coat for monocot should feel the same. Okay, they're slowing down. Someone said, check the Tactile Graphic Image Library to see if there is already a similar graphic. Otherwise, 2 separate graphics. Another person said, I will use puzzle style. Most color is unnecessary. Another person said, it's hard to describe what we mean. It's easier if we could show it, and we agree. In live sessions, if we were face-to-face, it would be so much easier. And if there weren't 300 of you with us, we could possibly have shown some things. Okay, you ready, Sally?
Yes, yes, those are awesome input. So let's go to the next slide. And here we have the planning. The first question you all asked is, what's the intent? It's to compare the differences and similarities of the different objects. In this case, the seeds and the leaves. Now, what would make this hard for a Braille reader to follow? Heard some of you mention overlapping seeds and leaves images. That's hard. Others talked about changing the view, the 3D angles of the seeds and the bent leaves. Not knowing what is what and adding labels to say that they are seeds and that they are leaves. This separation train of thought that some of you mentioned also applies to other situations, such as when a pie chart is superimposed over a map. This tends to happen in history books. The chart and the map are to be separated into separate map and a separate chart, unless the map is for decoration only, then it may be left out. But for the comparison of seeds and leaves, both the seeds and the leaves are needed. So let's go to the design. This is the tactile version, and this image is also actually in the Tactile Graphic Image Library. A comparison label layout has been used, placing each group side by side for that comparison. If they need to be enlarged, it could be put on facing pages. Now, the lead lines are of a different line type than the other outlines. You may also notice that the outline of the leaf is slightly stronger than the details in the leaf. However, the same textures were used for the same parts of both type of seeds for the comparison. I believe that was also mentioned. The monocot leaf was straightened as not to be misleading. And notice here that there is a straight 2D view of the seeds. Different lines and textures could have been used. It really depends on the method you are creating for and the end user. Remember, you are not creating art, you are representing information. Be wary of beautiful visual tactile graphics. Keys. Keys are used heavily in tactile graphics, and BANA covers them extensively, so I will not. A brief overview will do. The key listing should always be presented in the following order: area textures, line textures, point symbols, alphabetic key, and numeric key. The texture, symbol, or abbreviation used in a graphic must be an exact match to that used in the key listing. If possible, put the key on the page with the graphic. If not possible, the key pages should be placed on the facing page so that the reader can easily decode the tactile information without having to turn the pages. This would put the facing page key on the left side, the even page, and the tactile graphic on the right side, the odd number page. The entire key is enclosed in a transcriber's note symbol because the information is an interpretation of what is being presented in the print legend and graphic. This image shows eBay enclosures due to the date it was created, but use UEB symbols if you're transcribing in that code. Proofreading, a vital step in Braille transcription. Here are a few things to look for. I suggest making a list of common issues or habits you notice in your specific transcription. For instance, if you are working on algebra worksheets, you may want to add check for the X and Y axis labels. That should be a checkoff on your proofreading list. Small details that may be easily missed when you are in the thick of creating 25 Cartesian graphs. So for this slide, we have matching the key. In general, especially with collage, it is easier to change a discrepancy on the key page than on the tactile graphic page. Textures must match perfectly. An object to be measured must not be altered unless it can be accurately measured using an actual Braille ruler. Proofreading allows you to double check your numbers and make sure that during the design process, the object size didn't change. Intent. I'm not sure if I've said this word enough today, but it is the most important part of planning. So make sure the task can be accomplished and that the student can participate with the graphic in front of them. You may need to reread the question or the surrounding paragraph to make sure that you've captured it. And refer to the notes you wrote about the purpose when you were planning. Keep the parts you want to highlight, such as the plotted line, the strongest, most bold feature, and the secondary lines, such as the grid or the lead lines, the softest. Page numbers, headings, and item numbers help the reader stay on track and travel through the document quickly. Words are important, so make sure what you give them is accurate. Resources available. Again, not a complete list. This should help you get your resource list started and your information library stocked. Publications such as the Tactile Graphics book by Polly Edman and the Tactile Graphics Guidebook, bulletins and articles are great resources. Conferences, again, if available, from NBA, CTEB, VI, VAVF, and others. Also included on this page is the Tactile Graphic Image Library site and the Tactile Skills Matrix webpage. APH's Access Academy and the APH Hive should also be on your list. If you know of other sites and books that you have found helpful, type them into the chat now.
One person is asking if the image library address is correct. Oh, yes, it's missing an @ symbol if you are reading it.
Oh.
I think. Oh, no, I don't
No.
think so. No, it's correct.
No, it is imagelibrary.aph.org. You can access it through APH's main website, but this link will take you directly there. And if you have questions about the Tactile Graphic Image Library, you can email tgfeedback@aph.org. That is the email address to talk to them.
Okay, it looks like you might have covered them all. They're not thinking about additional resources. They might come in later.
Sure, sure. Well, I've also got more resources of what's coming up next on the next slide. More Wednesday Tactile Graphic webinars. Mark your calendars. Sign up with the links that I believe are being put in the chat and join us for the rest of this Tactile Graphics series. Learn from Karen Pope on January 20th with Setting the Stage for Tactile Understanding. I will be with you again on January 27th as we explore and use the Tactile Graphic Image Library. Learn about graphic embossers and other technology on February 3rd with William Freeman. And finally, I will close the Tactile Graphics series with creating collage tactile graphics on Wednesday, February 10th. And certified Braille transcribers, keep a watch out for a refresher Braille series coming soon, where Kyle DeJute will remind you of all the do's and don't forgets of UEB.
And while we have a few comments that are being placed into the chat box, if this is a good time, there are a few questions. We're not able to get to absolutely everything, but we are trying to get the highlights so we can get that shared out. And while you take this opportunity to drop other information to the chat, it's okay. Sally, I would love to go back in our minds to a previous graphic that you shared. It was of the living room scene.
Okay, sure.
Of the living room scene. And the question is, if we have it in our mind, if we can, I don't know if I can look to see what slide number it is, but how would you transcribe that exercise? The question was just omit it. And I think that that is a really good question to tease out of it. That pops into our heads as teachers often. Well, do we just omit it? So I wondered if you could speak upon that for just a moment, and Leanne graciously and quickly hold up the graphics. So for those sight dependent, light dependent folks, you can see what that cluttered, that's my word, picture is of this living room scene. What do you think, Sally?
Well, this is the image number 3 that we had, and there's just no equivalent. You know, your options are to make it into a tactile graphic. If you make it into a tactile graphic, you've just got a whole bunch of lines and shapes that are not going to read as the couch and the tricycle and the clock and all of the other things. And if Leanne, if you want to go to the next slide, take a look at the simple circles and the lines you see there. And the question on it is it on, above, or below? Even if you simplify it, it's going to be very hard for the tactile reader to be able to have the equivalent. Now, if you want to go back to the living room image, Leanne, sorry to keep you flipping there, but the other option we talk about is a transcriber's note. Okay, if you're going to write a transcriber's note, you are going to have to answer all of the questions. And that's not what we're supposed to be doing. To describe this in a transcriber's note, you are going to have to say, yes, the tricycle is in front of the table. That's going to be so descriptive to cover all of it. So I know that's a long thing just to say, the student is going to need an alternative activity. It is just not appropriate for the Braille reader. That's why We do not make it into a tactile graphic. Does that make sense?
That is great detail, and so thank you for taking the time to walk us through that very carefully. Another question that I want to be sure to get to, and also to, if these are things that are going to pop up in our other series too, we can help to remind each other. Is there any curriculum to teaching tactile graphics to a person, a student that has visual impairment? Things that pop into your mind, Sally?
The first thing that pops into my mind is Karen Pope's webinar that is coming up. It's talking a lot about products and all sorts of things on how to take from a hard concrete object and going to the abstract 2D version. So that is a webinar that's coming up. Those are excellent questions to direct towards Karen. The other piece of information I have, and I believe it is on the resource page, is the Tactile Graphics Kit guidebook. It speaks on that. The guidebook is directed a lot towards foil making, but it has so much more information. And so those are covered in that as well. But definitely sign up for the upcoming webinar.
So Sally, I wanted to circle back on something that you had just mentioned, the guidebook. So we did have, so with having over 300 attendees, the chat box is on fire, and trying to keep up with who's saying what and what the context is has been a challenge, but nonetheless, we move forward. And so I just want to ask for clarification. Donna made a comment in the chat box that says, I'm not able to locate the supplement on the APH page. The catalog number says discontinued. What I'm not sure is if we're talking about the supplement, something else that was talked about, or the guidebook. I just wanted to have maybe a few of us on the APH, and if we needed to hash that out in case there was any confusion from someone trying to locate things on the site. So Donna, if you are able to clarify anything, please feel free to do that in the chat while we think things through. Supplement to the tactile graphics guidelines is what she stated.
Okay, I know that the supplement to the tactile guidelines is available from APH. I don't know about the status. I don't know. I do know that a new version will be coming out when the guidelines are updated in UEB. A new version of that will come out.
So I am looking through. I know that we are still doing great on time. It's always hard to gauge of when, of how many questions are going to be put out there. We are caught up on the questions. One did just pop up with what you just talked about, Sally. Do you have any idea of an expectation of when that will come out?
All I know, I am not part of the committee that puts them out, but I do know that they are hard working on it currently, that it is something that's in their focus, and that it may come out this year. It just depends, you know, there's so many factors to it, but it should be sooner than later, but that's really all I know is that they are in the works of being worked on.
Well, if you want to stay on, then feel free to stay on and continue picking.
There is another question. Can you explain the different views a little more? Front, cross-sectional?
Front and cross-sectional, they are really about the same. A lot of times cross-section is something divided in half. So say the seed, or say the globe, or say a water cycle, where you're going to see underground and, you know, above ground and sky. Front would be more for, you know, they're kind of interchangeable words, but you would see the front of that segment piece there, you know, where you're almost just turning it a little bit and you're just seeing one side of it. But since there are two images on the same page and the same thought, I would use the same terminology just to not cause any more confusion for the student. And something I didn't discuss is on this slide page, those are just the random 3D shapes of the view if you didn't change it. And so hopefully seeing that will let you know just kind of how, if nothing else, a little bit misleading of the layers could be if you didn't change the angle. Any more questions? This has been so fun.
So what I can mention is that we do have those upcoming webinars that you featured on the last slide of the PowerPoint of what is there, and people are, if things have slowed down, I'm happy to share the closing information. I can share that there will be a survey. We value your feedback of what you thought and how we can better serve you with these type of webinars, especially with moving forward. So be on the lookout for that. And I am